Podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 28. What can a peanut butter and jelly sandwich teach us about compliance? So, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You have peanut butter, you have jelly, you have bread, you have just a classic sandwich for all to enjoy. It's fantastic. Unless you throw it into a bag and save for later, and it becomes stale, and the jelly soaks into the bread and just becomes disgusting. Anyway, a compliance framework requires that you follow specific guidelines in order to secure and protect your environment and the data within. So cybersecurity frameworks, HIPAA, PCI DSS, NIST 800-171, CMMC, ISO 27001, there's a ton. There's a lot. There are more cybersecurity frameworks than I think there are cybersecurity workers. That's the way it feels, at least. The most important thing to remember about all cybersecurity frameworks, that if you weren't aware, the most important thing to remember is that there are two sets of mitigations or controls or guideline followings, or basically there are two separate paths that you can go. You can have a policy. Some of the guidelines require a policy to be made, meaning a written policy that you follow. This is something that is effectively it's just a document. That's all it is. It's just a document that you are basically saying, this is our practice. This is how we do things. These are typically documents that end up in like an employee handbook, or that are strictly, they're just documents that tell that describe how your business runs. From there, you have technical controls, and these are the actual things behind your environment. Things like the rules that dictate when you change passwords, and how your passwords are supposed to look, and who can install what, and what users have access to what, and what your administrators are. That is all your technical controls. Now, in a cybersecurity framework, as you are attempting to be compliant with it, you'll find that they kind of fall into one another, or make each other more or less necessary. So, for instance, what I mean by that is when you have a proper technical control, your policy ends up being very short. Ends up being something akin to just a statement about the way that the technical control is implemented. So, for instance, if you were to say in HIPAA, one of the HIPAA guidelines is how do you ensure that all of your data is encrypted at rest? A lot of companies spend a lot of time being worried about making sure that their workstations and laptops are encrypted, that they have BitLocker enabled on them. But the problem with that is that if a system for whatever reason can't be encrypted, or you forget to encrypt the system, your entire system breaks down. So you can create a whole bunch of policies that say, oh, well, we don't save anything to the workstations. That would circumvent it. Yeah, if you have a bunch of policies that state that, but then showing that actual process and proving it is a little bit more difficult. But if you have a policy in place, a technical policy in place that enforces that refuses users the ability to save stuff locally, then you can effectively have a policy that states, through our technical controls, saving to a local hard drive is impossible. And that makes proof a whole lot easier, because all then you have to do is take a screenshot of your policy that dictates that. And so technical controls can kind of go in and out and up and down and with your policies. Some policies can be completely circumvented by your technical controls, meaning you don't have to have that policy as an actual written policy. There are ways to do that. So what does this all have to do with a sandwich? Well, fucking a sandwich is tasty, right? And so is proper compliance and your ability to follow it. And sometimes, or rather with compliance, it isn't just enough to have policies or technical controls. It isn't just enough. You do have to have both. And in the long run, you're going to have some policies and technical controls in place in tandem. And there's just no way around it. And for instance, you are going to have technical controls around like passwords and user behavior and what people can install on their shit. But you also have to have like written policies for business continuity and disaster recovery and incident response. You have to have these policies written out. And so having them written out and having technical controls is going to be how you fully have a compliance framework. Just like when you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you have to have a full peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You can't just have a peanut butter sandwich and you can't just have a jelly sandwich. You have to have both in order to have a decent sandwich. I suppose, a peanut butter sandwich is okay for some people, namely if you're like 3 years old, and a jelly sandwich is for those of you who are psychotic. But in order to have a full wholesome sandwich, you have to have both there. You have to have both your compliance and your compliance policies and your technical controls in place and actually usable. Now the bread in this circumstance would probably be you following your policies and your technical controls. It is the aspect of do what you say and making sure that you're not just you don't just have the things in place to satisfy the policies and technical controls. You are actually doing the things that are necessary. You're actually following those rules, because without the bread, and if you have just peanut butter and jelly, now you have this just giant goopy mess on a fucking plate that, if you're going to eat like a dog. You're going to lick it up and like a psycho, or, be like Ted Lasso and stick your finger in the jar. But that doesn't work. If you don't follow your policies and you don't follow your technical controls, then it's all for naught. You're basically just checking a box and walking the fuck away, which is absolutely the wrong way. And that's how companies get compromised. For instance, in an example we learned earlier this week, this is being recorded on May the 4th, we learned this week that Change Healthcare got compromised through their Citrix environment. And it sounds like they didn't have proper multi-factor authentication controls over their own environment. I can guarantee you that inside of some policy, somewhere in their environment, and some technical control, they enforce multi-factor authentication for all accounts. They're a big enough organization that should be kind of a bare minimum for them to have for their compliance following. But they obviously did not follow their own compliance framework because they didn't have multi-factor authentication on whatever account got compromised. And that's a big fucking deal. This is the perfect example for how, when you have a cybersecurity framework and you don't follow it, the fucking consequences of it. There's also a lot more to it that I'll probably get into at another time. But needless to say, if you don't follow your own guidelines, if you don't follow your own policies, you will get fucked, and it will cost your company a lot of money. Just like Change Healthcare is probably going to lose $1.5 billion because of this hack, not to mention the $22 million that they sent in payment to the hackers, which you guys, if you've listened to this podcast, you know my fucking opinion on that. So back to the sandwich, back to cybersecurity frameworks, back to what the fuck do I mean? Cybersecurity frameworks are a combination of technical controls and written policies. And in order to fully satisfy a compliance framework, it isn't just enough to have your technical or your written policies, and it's not just enough to have your technical controls. You have to have them both in place, and you have to be following them. You have to show that. And what we're finding with compliance frameworks in all of this is that if you don't have the bread, if you don't have the peanut butter, if you don't have the jelly, if you're missing a piece, you will be cut out. Insurance companies are requiring that you show your ability to follow your own policies. Cybersecurity frameworks are adjusting to make sure that they account for making sure that you're following your own compliance policies. CMMC v1 did not do this very well. CMMC v2 now does this. It now asks for how you are following the guidelines, and it asks for proof. And you have to provide it in order to be considered compliant. So, as you develop your own compliance guideline or your own compliance framework, as you discover what compliance frameworks you need to follow, and as you go down the path of compliance, keep that in mind. It is not just enough to do the thing. You actually have to follow it. You actually have to do what you say. And, compliance frameworks, one of the biggest questions we get as companies travel down the path of compliance is we get the question of, well, how do I do this but not really change anything? And the answer to that is you don't. You actually do end up having to change things, and you will end up having to spend money to become compliant. But the entire purpose of the compliance framework is to keep you, is to standardize your environment so that you are secure, so that you become more secure than without it. And when you try to circumvent or try to cheap out on a cybersecurity framework, you become a Change Healthcare. You lose your sandwich. People are eating your lunch, and that has to stop. You have to bite the bullet and spend the money, because otherwise you're just going to end up with this fucking goopy mess in front of you that's going to end up wasting food, wasting time, wasting resources, and you're going to just be embarrassed when people find out. So that's it. That's all I got for today. Hope you guys have a great